a thing about Ecclesiastes is that it's kind of a downer, right? The overall message is you're going to die. And I remember as it was my responsibility to teach Ecclesiastes, this is a long time ago at Alaska Bible Institute, and I remember sitting in my little dorm room, number 3, I think, and reading Ecclesiastes over and over again, and had been for several days, and feeling the clock tick that I'm responsible to teach this book very soon, and having no idea really what to say about it. And I just remember this one time after reading it several times, and sometimes it takes that, the Lord opening it up to me and showing me the great hope we have even in our death. And in that, it was like 3 a.m. or something like that. And I think I was teaching the next day. And in that moment, just the presence of the Lord speaking to me through Ecclesiastes, I literally pushed myself away from my desk and dropped to my knees. I was so in awe of His presence and His voice and His hope. It was beautiful. And all of that out of Ecclesiastes. It's a joy. You know, Christians are crazy the way we can find joy even in a message of death, right? But it is the reality of the Holy Spirit for us. So, you know, the bulk of Ecclesiastes is really, it's a wisdom, it's a part of the wisdom literature, which means, much like Proverbs, a lot of it is written in what I call zingers, right? A quick little phrase, a quick little one-liner that communicates a deep truth, the kind of thing that you can just kind of absorb and chew on for a while. We often find these zingers on calendars from the bank with pictures of mountains and frosty mornings and stuff like that, right? We find zingers from Ecclesiastes maybe in fortune cookies. It's just written in such a way that it fits nicely in small packages of wisdom. Our routine here at Church on the Rock is to try to bring some narrative, some kind of story to the passage we're teaching on. And Ecclesiastes doesn't necessarily lend itself to that kind of teaching very well. It's zingers, it's little poems. So this morning, after you have been exposed to the book of Ecclesiastes once more, it will fall on you to provide the narrative. In fact, this is a book that is written to anyone who would listen, anyone who would be teachable. The truth is that there is an opportunity for every one of us to die. In fact, it is not even an opportunity that you can avoid. It's gonna happen. And Ecclesiastes very skillfully makes us aware of another opportunity that is available to every one of us, even as we are dying. It is the opportunity to live. And so now that I've introduced you to the main character of Ecclesiastes, let me introduce you to a few guides for a great narrative. Right? I want to read Ecclesiastes chapter 3. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to uproot. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to tear down, and a time to build. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones, and a time to gather them. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search, and a time to give up. A time to keep, and a time to throw away. A time to tear, and a time to mend. A time to be silent, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time for war, and a time for peace. And I'll just say it because I know you're thinking it. Turn, 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 right? Yeah. Verse 9. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Let me read that again. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken away from it. God does it so people will fear him. There's a number of things that I want to highlight as we think about and reflect on that poem, that passage. I want to begin with time. There is a time for everything. And to us, that seems like it's not even worth saying, like it's not even like a point to be made. For us, in our experience, all we know is time, right? From the day we were born, we've been functioning in this context of time. But it is appropriate in the scriptures for the Lord to kind of isolate that as its own part of the human experience, because it is not a part of his experience, right? Eternity is not a measure of time. Life on earth is a measure of time. And there is a time for everything. Even in our human experience, there is a difference between man-made time and natural God-made time. If you are tuning into the hours and the minutes, those are helpful tools, but that is not God-made time. You realize that, right? Those are man-made increments so that we can all synchronize to some kind of rhythm and know when to show up for breakfast, when to come to church, when to get to work, and when to go home, right? Hours and minutes, those are man-made time. But in nature, God has created increments of time. He talks about the seasons, right? You look without your watch to the sky and you watch the sun grow fuller, the moon grow fuller and fuller, and then back again, reducing till it's just a very thin crescent. And you know that is nature's time moving us forward, right? You watch the snow fall, and then you'll watch it melt and the mud rise. And then eventually things will turn that, do you remember in the spring, that iridescent green? Do you remember that? And then it turns a little bit darker, and we are deep into summer at that point. In my home in Michigan, where I grew up, watching the trees turn brilliant, beautiful colors, right? So we know that nature and God have created this rhythm of time. And of course, the simplest rhythm of time is days. That in most parts of the world, the sun comes up on a daily routine, right? And the sun goes back down, and there is a rhythm of time in nature called days. Since life is seasonal, and it's true not only of nature, but even of our own lives, we are young and strong and full of energy, and then in time, we step into a new season where we click and pop, right? And it's a little bit harder to move, and then we move into a new season even after that, where mobility is actually a real challenge and a great risk, right? So even in our own bodies, in our own lifetime, there is a season that we move through. I'll be honest with you, I have been thinking about seasons for a long time. Probably honestly, from the time I taught Ecclesiastes so many years ago, I have been thinking about my life in terms of seasons. And I have found, personally, such a freedom in thinking about my life in terms of seasons. It seems like sometimes we feel like we want to arrive at a season, and that's the season. And when nature begins to move us into a next season, we grasp for that other season that we've already gained some mastery over, right? We resist this flow into seasons. But for me, it has become a great freedom to look at my life in terms of seasons. If I look at my life in terms of seasons, when things are difficult, when I'm weary, when this season is getting old, I remind myself that it is only a season. Not only that, but I recognize that God makes all things beautiful in its time. So this is a season, and this season is for a reason. It has a purpose to it. Am I disciplining myself to tune in to the greatest value of that season or not? That is a piece of wisdom, a skill that I hope that each one of you will enjoy the blessing of. Looking at your life in terms of season and saying to yourself, what is the greatest value of these moments, these days, right now, that I can focus on them and get all the benefit of this season before I move into the next one? Not only that, but when things are good, I'm in a good season. It reminds me that I should savor this. I should enjoy the sweetness of this good season. I should put energy into creating memories and writing down the things the Lord is teaching me, memorials, because this season too will morph into a different kind of season. And so for me, time, seeing my life in seasons has been a great joy. There's a passage in Psalms 90, verse 12. The psalmist says, in a prayer to the Lord, he says, teach us to number our days, to tune in to where we are on our own personal calendar, to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Teach us to tune in to the seasons of our life so that we might skillfully navigate those seasons. And I would say this morning that whether you are living or dying this morning, and the truth is everyone in this room is doing both, right? I would say though, whether you would describe this season, these moments of your life as living or dying, hinges on wisdom, your capacity to skillfully navigate this season of life. And so let me ask you a couple questions, just for you to jot down and prayerfully reflect on later. Are you skillfully maximizing where you are planted right now? Are you taking inventory of the uniqueness of this season and skillfully maximizing this season for all its potential? Let me ask you this. Are you adequately prepared to move on when the time is right? Because the time is coming when there will be a change in the season. Are you ready to trust the Lord enough to step in to that next season? As humans, God created us. He lumped us in sand and bent down and breathed life into us. And we became alive. And as humans, he said to us, he said, I have made you in my likeness and in my image. I have made you as my likeness and image as a people who will rule and subdue the earth. It is a part of what it means to be human, to rule and subdue, right? And time is one of those things that he has given us to rule and subdue. Have you ever felt like time has ruled and subdued you? Have you ever been there? Have you ever felt like the rhythm of time has just washed you over and you have been pinned to the floor, right? By time. Yeah. Have you ever noticed that in those moments when you feel so overwhelmed by the movement of the season, have you ever noticed that it's easy to feel even less human than ever because of that movement? I think this is why in Deuteronomy, the Lord says, I want you each one to mark the weeks, mark the days. I want you, each one of you, to have a Sabbath day of rest. And he goes on to explain why that is. He says, there was a time in your life as a nation when you were slaves. You were not even human. You were machinery for the Egyptians, right? And on those days in that season of your history when you were overwhelmed, You were not seen as even human. On those days, you were not allowed to rule the days and rest. But now that you are a free people, I want you to take a Sabbath and remember you are to rule your seasons and celebrate that ruling and subduing by taking a Sabbath. So there is a time, and there is a time for wisdom. Wisdom makes all the difference as we manage time. Also notice in this poem this one phrase. Of course, I can't do all the phrases, but I've chosen a few that have been meaningful to me personally. There is also a time to plant. Did you notice that? A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to take something small, a seed, a little seedling, and put it in the earth and give it the opportunity to grow big and strong and to produce much more. There's a time for that, a time for investment. Many of you have heard my spiel. It seems to me that there is a rhythm in our lives, a rhythm of investment and management. When we are young, we begin to invest in things. We begin to invest in learning a trade. We begin to invest in acquiring for ourselves an education. We begin to invest in possibly building a family, right? These types of things. We invest. And in time, those things that we've invested to achieve create for us a set of responsibilities that now we must manage. Is that true for you? And so there's this rhythm of investment, and then a rhythm following that rhythm of investment, a rhythm of management. And so we manage these things that we have acquired through our investment. And in time, as that season moves forward and we manage those things, at first we start out not really knowing what we're doing, but there's a thrill to mastering that, to figuring that out. But in time, we've mastered it, we've figured it out, and now that thing that we're managing becomes wearisome to us, or maybe it gets old, boring, whatever, right? I would say that if you are weary of managing the things that are in your life, I would say if there's a weariness to that, that's an indication that it's time to reinvest, to start planting again. Let me just say something, especially to those of you that are husbands of wives who are raising small children, especially to that specific crowd. You ready for this? I want to brag on a guy who's had great influence in my life, Dwayne Nussfeld. This is one of his strings that he strums over and over and over again, and I need to hear it. I'm amazed how often I forget it in spite of how often I hear it. And that is this. Guys, your wife has literally laid down, often this is the case, your wife has laid down her life to manage what you have invested in. Do you understand what I'm saying? You said, look, I've given you money, I've given you a house, I've given you dishes, I've given you food, I've given you kids. Now I'm leaving for 8 hours a day, and when I come home, I want to watch Jason Bourne, right? And so you manage all that. Well, fellas, the wife is probably weary, right? You would be wise to decide to beat her to the punch and decide for her, honey, let's create some space for you to invest. Not, honey, here's something more you can invest, right? But allow her the space to be creative, the time, the energy. You take care of the kids for a while. Create that opportunity for her to invest. You guys, I'll tell you what, I'll just throw that out there. You guys do what you want with that. You figure that out on your own, okay? But let me just remind you that what we're planting, you never plant a full tree. You plant a seed. And so ladies, you may feel like, how can I add one more thing to my life? Well, number one, Pastor Skip has told your husband to help you. Number two, it can be small. A simple little thing. 15 minutes to get alone with the Lord every day. You can do that. Lock yourself in the bathroom. Throw a blanket over your head, right? Figure out a way to invest in small ways. Here's another indicator that it may be time to plant. Are you discovering, this is across the board, are you discovering that you are using up your pool of resources, whether it's energy or insight or finances? Are you discovering that you are using up your pool of resources, and yet at the same time more is required of you? That you are in effect stepping into what feels like bankruptcy. If that's you, and it may seem counterintuitive, but if that's you, I would say it's time to plant. It's time to find a way to reinvest, even if a simple seed. The second thing I want to highlight is not only is there a time to plant, but there is also a time to kill. And I would say this, an indicator of when it's time to kill is when there is no rhythm to the dying at all. When your experience is just one solid death, maybe an increase in death. Do you understand what I'm saying? That you don't feel that there is an opportunity to come up for breath and be replenished by some level of joy. If there is no rhythm to it at all, it may be that it's time to kill. If you feel like the residents of Narnia, that it is always winter and never Christmas, it may be time to kill. Not the whole package, of course, but the dynamic that is the cancer. Think of another story from C.S. Lewis where he describes a lizard on a man's shoulder. Do you remember this from The Great Divorce? And I don't remember, it's been a long time since I read that. But what I do remember is that he had this little lizard that tortured him and sucked the life out of him. And when one came along, I believe it was an angel, I don't remember, but you'll have to read the book, who was willing to get the lizard off his shoulder and kill him, the man said, "Oh, but the lizard, I just wish that he would be silent. I want to keep the lizard." Do you remember this? Some of you? Yeah. Well, I think that the whole package doesn't have to be killed, but maybe the dynamic that is a cancer. A time to kill, which is pretty brutal language, isn't it? A time to kill? Why, do I really have to kill the dragon, the lizard? Do I really have to kill this dynamic? I actually find, once in a while, I find some sick pleasure in it, kinda. Well, yeah. But if there's no rhythm to the dying, if it's all dying, then it's probably time to kill. Let me encourage you with this. It may be that if you're questioning, is it time for me to kill, or is it still time for me to heal? Maybe it would be helpful to you to set a tripwire, a spot on your calendar 6 months out, where you would say, if this rhythm has not ceased in 6 months, then it is no rhythm at all, and I've just proven it to myself. In 6 months, a rhythm ought to work itself out, or whatever the time is, you decide, but you understand the concept. Put it on your calendar. If this is not changed, by this time, I'm going to get aggressive and do some killing, because there is a time to kill, and there is a time to heal. We often put our head down and work on resurrecting this corpse, right? And we forget to look up and accept the possibility of an ending. Scripture says that God has made all things beautiful in His time. He says that He has placed eternity in our hearts. There is something beyond the end of that season. Right? There is a beauty on the other side of the end of that season. Don't be afraid to kill. There is a fearlessness at the edge of hopelessness. When you show up at the edge of hopelessness and you say, I have done everything I can do, everything I can think of, and now I am at the edge of hopelessness. and yet there's more life to live. I would just encourage you, embrace the fearlessness that is there, and trusting yourself to the God who makes all things beautiful in his time.